After cracking Revelation 7, I had hoped that the author might do a somewhat linear representation of the destruction of Jerusalem. However, in Chapter 8, the author threw me another curveball. Chapter 8 is again another easy allegory. This chapter begins by opening the seventh seal. I won't read this whole section. The author is talking about events in heaven, and though it is possible that whenever the Revelation author speaks of heaven, he is talking about stars, most of the time we simply wouldn't know what he's talking about, so I'll have to skip most references to heaven. Then the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared to sound them. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down on the earth. A third of the earth was burned up, a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. The second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain, all ablaze, was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea turned to blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. I'd love for this to be a siege, but it's not. The author gives himself away in verse 8. A huge mountain all ablaze thrown into the sea sounds a lot like a volcano, and a massive amount of fish dying sounds like a typical volcano-related fish kill. A description of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE comes from Pliny the Younger. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, was a prefect of the Roman navy at Misenum. Now, the Elder is reported to have used his ships to attempt a rescue of civilians. However, as his ships approached Pompeii and Herculaneum, the smoke, ash, gases, and chunks of rock falling from the sky became too great. He turned his fleet south to Stabai. Luckily for him, there was such a strong outflow of wind, and his ships were able to reach the coast quickly. However, they were not able to leave because of the same wind. Pliny the Elder would die during this event, though the reason for his death is unknown. Pliny the Younger sent his record of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius to the Roman historian Tacitus. The final version of this event, as written by Tacitus, does not exist at this time or has not been discovered yet. Luckily, the letters of Pliny the Younger have survived, so we have most of the story. The hail is boulders and rocks. The fire mixed with blood is probably a reference to lava, and a whole bunch of stuff was burned up. The second angel takes the top off the mountain and throws it into the sea, and a whole bunch of fish die, and any ships in the area were destroyed. These two verses are very close to the description of Vesuvius by Pliny the Younger. The Younger describes massive amounts of rocks bombarding the sea and a raising of the sea floor, which exposes a whole bunch of dead fish. The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. This ends up being a curious statement. We know that volcanoes can have an effect on open water systems. It's rarely lethal, but it would certainly affect taste. But Pliny the Younger does not mention it in his letters to Tacitus. What likely happened is that Tacitus took several accounts to come to a conclusion about the event and mentioned something about the water being bad. If this is the case, the Revelation author is getting information from Tacitus, not Pliny the Younger. The fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them turned dark. A third of the day was without light, and also a third of the night. Once again, Pliny the Younger describes the resulting darkness. He knows that it's daytime, but he reports that the sky is barely visible, and it's actually a quite interesting read. Except for the bitter water, this whole event is told by Pliny the Younger. His letters to Tacitus probably made up the bulk of the history written by Tacitus. But there were probably more sources, and funky water in an open system is to be expected. The last verse of this chapter simply warns us of whatever is coming next. Head for the hills, it's going to be something terrible. Now, Vesuvius was not something I expected, but I did want to point out something. Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE. Notice the dates of the last three chapters. The Revelation author does not have these dates. The current dating system was determined much later. Back in Revelation 6, the entire chapter was broken down into an event with 2 time references. The Revelation author seems to think time is very important enough to describe 3 events roughly 10 years apart from each other. It might be coincidence, but I find this author can be terribly precise when he wants to be, and I suspect he may mention Vesuvius both as a horrible event and as a time reference. The first 4 angels of the 7th seal are purely a reference to Vesuvius. The mountain blows its top, burns a bunch of stuff, and kills a bunch of people and fish. Not even the ships are spared. At this point, I simply have no idea what's around the corner. This guy is a bit unpredictable, and I'll have to sit back and take whatever he throws at me.